Welcome, everyone. It's so good to see you all tonight. I'm going to turn off my music on my end as well. So we're just really thrilled to welcome you all tonight to our session on seeing the care that is all around us. Maria and I and Michael are here from Weave, the Social Fabric Project, and we ask people to think about how you weave people together, many of you in your communities, through creating trusting relationships. And it's probably just part of how you live your life, bringing people together for a sense of belonging. And Rajiv is a member of our community, and we were just so excited when he wanted to create this session for us. And what he asked us to do is imagine a world that's different if people were more aware of their interconnectedness, of the many daily acts of love and generosity around them, and of the impact their actions have on everyone's well-being. And this is something he's tested in many different spaces. He tested this idea in Michigan last year with groups ranging from high school students, restaurant workers, and social activists, health professionals, professors, and business leaders. So he has been working deeply in this area, and he's going to show us some of the tools that he uses in this process. So Rajiv, if you look at a little bit about his bio, he has worked as an aerospace engineer. He's led new product innovation for companies like Apple, Adobe, and Motorola. He runs the nonprofit Atlas of Care in Fremont, California, and his work on care mapping has been funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, AARP, the Michigan Health Endowment, and others. And he's co-organized 14 international conferences. And so that's a little bit about his work, but I just want to say that, that planning this event with Raj has just been such an honor. In every conversation, he truly lives the work that he does. It is how he approaches relationships. It's just been such a pleasure to work with you, Raj, and I can't wait to turn the event over to you. And we will be here to monitor the chat if you have questions that you'd like to ask Raj, but we will now turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks a lot, Francis. Thanks to you and Michael and all for inviting me to speak to the group. I'm going to share my screen because at least for the first part of this, there's a bunch of visuals that turn out to be handy. So let me just get that up, make sure it's all working. All right. So hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. As I just said, I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to share with our Weave community the work that I've been doing. And all of us who are part of this community are concerned with the well-being of our communities. We're trying to strengthen our communities, make them more resilient, or sometimes just the basics of creating a community, of fostering a sense of belonging. And I know from some of my conversations with my Weave colleagues, from Racine, Wisconsin to a ranch in Montana to Compton, the work varies tremendously, but it also has these commonalities. And so what I hope is for this talk is that you not only find it interesting, but also useful. I hope that you'll be able to directly make use of some of the things Atlas has been doing, or at least take inspiration from our work. And as Francis described, I've been exploring the question of how would the world be different if people were more aware of their interconnectedness, of the many daily acts of love and generosity around them, and how would that impact their actions and everyone's well-being. So what my experience has shown me is that caring for others in our community, meaning the actual actions we take for the benefit of each other's well-being, is central to the idea of community. A community is a community because the members actively care for each other. So to kind of jump to the punchline, three key ideas that I'd like to encourage you to see and value the care that is all around you. I'd like you to appreciate that deep seeing is a skill. something that can and should be cultivated, and that I'd like for you to fully leverage your community's collective capacity to care for each other. So now, to say a bit more about this, not to end my talk there, my career before I got into this socially oriented work was in science and technology, doing basic research at NASA and leading innovation efforts in Silicon Valley. And this quote from the author Marcel Proust, "The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes." This is a quote that resonates strongly with me. Almost always, seeing things in a new way is the crucial first step to leaps in innovation. And new eyes means new perspectives. And often that happens because we have developed new tools and methods for seeing the world, which have then shown us unexpected things. So you can think of tools like the telescope or the microscope or all kinds of scientific instruments, but there's also innovations in how we display data, how we collect data, such as in maps, and even the humble bar chart was an innovation back in the late 1700s. When it comes to our own efforts around care and community, my experience has shown me the importance of us regular people having tools to see better into our own lives. Now, our lives are complex, so I'm not talking about gathering simple data, through checklists and surveys. Rather, I'm talking about tools that help us see this complexity, which then helps hone our own intuitions. When you're learning to see, it's best to begin to pay attention first to yourself, partly because you're the most accessible and cooperative subject you're likely to come across, but partly because discovering how complex your own life is will give you far more empathy and understanding for the lives of others. So for the rest of my talk, I'll first show you some tools that we have developed, which you can use to look into your own lives. And then I'll describe how these have had community level impacts and what we at Atlas have done to sort of encourage that. And I'll close with a question about how we as a Weave community might leverage this work for our own support and camaraderie, and hopefully leaving plenty of time for a rich Q&A afterwards. So let me start by noting that well-being is not just about illness. It's not just about dealing with health professionals. Health doesn't happen only in medical clinics and in gyms. Health results from all that we do wherever we live, work, and play. And likewise, care is not only about helping people because of their illness and disability. Yet care, of course, includes what we do for our children and elders, but we also care for and are cared by our friends. And for many people, their closest friends are also their coworkers. And past our close friends and family, if you really pay attention, you'll see how much heart and soul people put into caring for their customers, caring for their students, and caring for others in their community. So the Atlas Care Map is a tool that helps people see more clearly these interconnections, the web of care that exists in their lives. And we've developed several such pen and paper tools. Each is designed to help you pay closer attention to some aspect of your community, some aspect of your well-being. The Atlas Care Map is a diagram of who's caring for whom in a family. It's a snapshot of a person's care ecosystem at a particular point in time. There's simple icons that represent people, pets, places involved, and there's arrows showing who is caring for whom. It's important to note that a care map may or may not be, quote, correct. It's never complete. It describes the perception of the person who draws. And though it looks simple, for many people, drawing their care map has in fact had a profound impact. It's not just the drawing itself, though that is useful. Rather, the impact comes from the thinking you do as you reflect on your life, on who to include, on the relationships, and later the conversations that result. The impact varies a lot. Our lives can be very different. So let me share with you 3 little stories. One young woman in her late 20s had been suffering from long COVID for about a year when she drew her care map. As she drew her map, she grew angry as she saw clearly and starkly how little support she had received from family and friends. And this happens sometimes. Sometimes when you look carefully, you just get a better idea of how bad things are. She also felt frustrated, remembering what life was like pre-COVID, when she had pride in being strong and independent and capable. But this also brought a new realization that her pride and independence had kept her from asking for or accepting help. For her, a big aha was that, in her words, she had to put aside her ableist self-image and allow others to care for her. Another person, a waitress, an immigrant, had felt very alone before she drew her map. Except for her husband and children, all of her family and friends lived far away in South America. But as she drew her map, as she found herself including many of her coworkers, she discovered that her self-image was really wrong. Over the years, she had in fact grown very close to several coworkers. They were deeply involved in each other's lives, not just as coworkers. They were close friends. They were family. She realized, I am not alone. A third person was a middle-aged man originally from Hawaii. His map included his parents, who lived about an hour away, and lots of family back home in Hawaii. And seeing how alone his parents were led him to start a conversation with his parents about eventually moving back to Hawaii so that they would have more support as they aged. Eventually, these conversations led to the father realizing that his son was unaware of close friendships that he had developed. The mother was isolated, the father was not. So this now made the question of moving back to Hawaii much more difficult, but they all now better understood the reality of their lives. So for all 3 people, learning to see in their lives was powerful. So let me tell you a brief little bit more about the Atlas Care Map tool. The key questions that you ask yourself as you draw it are, who all do I care for? Who else cares for them? And who cares for me? The arrows show who is caring for whom, and the type of arrow, thick, dotted, etc., represents frequency of involvement. The map also gives a sense of place. Those near you are drawn nearby, and those who live far away are on the edges of the page. The process encourages you to think of all types of care, whatever you feel is important. So here's a simple example. At the time, Faye was in her early 30s, taking a leave from grad school so that she could care for her mother, Josephine, in her 60s, who had dementia. At a glance, you can tell that there are several people involved in this family's care ecosystem, but it's also quite clear that almost all the burden is on Faye's shoulders. In this family, Gaston and his wife, Hannah, share their Sacramento home with 5 pets and Hannah's brother, Harvey. And there's just a lot of arrows in this diagram. There's a lot of care of different people. And it shows the reality that nearly everyone is both a caregiver and a care receiver and connected to multiple people. The idea of a simple dyad, a caregiver, a care recipient, rarely happens in real life. This last example was drawn by Sammy, who was 8 years old at the time. I later redrew it with the family's permission to make it more legible and to disguise some personal information. You can see that Sammy shares his home with his mother and her parents. He shows that he does a lot to take care of his grandfather along with his grandmother. She is tall and thin, and he is short and fat, and that's how he drew them. He also shows that his mom does a lot to take care of him, as well as some others, his dad, a couple of friends, a distant family friend, his school. He's also included his cat, and he drew his cat in a cloud because it's no longer alive. But Sammy felt comforted by the knowledge that his cat still watches out for him. So Sammy's mother learned a lot from his drawing. She came to appreciate how complex and sophisticated his view of the world was. And Sammy's not alone. Many other second grade students have drawn care maps, helped by their teachers. So I am very confident that you will be able to do the same. We currently feature 6 tools, including the care map, in a larger program that we call Mapping Ourselves. And I'll give you the URL in a little bit, but all of this is downloadable by you. The social network tool emphasizes different characteristics of the relationships than the care map. It's particularly useful when considering non-family groups such as at work or community organizations. The conversations tool helps you appreciate the moment-to-moment, hour-to-hour impact of conversations on your well-being. What leaves you energized? What leaves you drained? Why is that? The daily activities tool is about how you spend your time, which can reveal a lot about both your circumstances as well as your beliefs and values. The environment tool helps you become aware of the spaces you inhabit and their impact on you. Embodied connection helps you become more aware of the physical, emotional, and mental changes you experience over time and start seeing patterns and how these all interact. Now, I just want to acknowledge that all of these tools are unfamiliar and so require some real effort to learn, but in the end, you will discover that they are quite simple. They're also meant to be flexible and become more powerful as you tailor them to suit your needs and interests. You find yourself, taking ideas from one tool and putting it in another. In the process of learning and using these tools, you become more and more skilled at what we call personal science, basically developing skills at examining anything in your own life in a disciplined manner, including developing your own tools for the job. I should mention that these tools and ideas are built upon the work of many others. In particular is the Quantified Self community, which began in the Bay Area over a dozen years ago. This is now a loose-knit global community of people who experiment with tracking various aspects of their lives with the aim of better understanding their lives and perhaps making things better in some way. I've been very involved with this community, one of the leaders since our very first meeting back in 2008. And since then, the community has held hundreds of meetings around the world and over a dozen conferences. And the experiments that have been conducted by this community have led to innovations in many fields, including in all those health-related sensors that you now find in your phones and watches. Another major collaborator has been information designer Georgia Lupi, who is a partner with Pentagram Design. In the book and project Dear Data, Georgia and Stephanie Posevich explored a different topic in their lives every week for a whole year. So friendships and complaints and clothing and aloneness. It's an amazing body of work, which is now part of the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And it's honestly a must-have book, as well as this companion book that teaches you how to do the same. I should mention that these are books that you must get in paper. Don't waste your money getting an ebook for these things. And as I said, the information and templates for all of these tools can be downloaded for free from our website. So please make full use of them. It's basically atlasofcare.com, mapping ourselves. So now I want to talk about community and how these tools have impacted not just the individuals and their close families, but their larger communities. The folks in this photo are with a volunteer organization in Santa Barbara, California, called Promotores de Salud, and I learned a lot from working with them. So a few years ago, about 20 of them participated in a care map workshop in Santa Barbara, in which I led them through drawing and reflecting on their own care maps. For some, the experience was cathartic. There was crying. Afterwards, several of them described the impact as life-changing and asked to be taught how to lead such workshops themselves. But life-changing, honestly, what were they talking about? So we spent a lot of time with them to understand and came to see how the workshop experience had not just changed their lives at the individual family level, but changed their relationships with each other and the larger community. In the workshop, they had the experience of learning and reflecting on their care maps together. And therefore, in the process, they opened up to each other, saw each other much more richly. They became closer to each other and became more aware of each other's circumstances, as well as their knowledge, expertise, capacity. And the conversation that began in the workshop simply continued into normal life. So when they saw each other, at the grocery store or at Starbucks, it became natural to ask about each other's families and how things had changed. As they became more and more expert at observing their own lives, they began to teach lots of other friends and family and community members. And over time, they have become the go-to experts in Santa Barbara about care maps. The promotores opened our eyes to the community level impact of learning to see, to the fact that such an impact was happening. We were sort of oblivious to it until they pointed it out. But at first, we didn't really understand why this was happening or how to consciously harness and catalyze such social impact. Now, as a scientist, I know this happens. You do something and something completely unexpected happens. It's exciting. There's something to learn here. But it also means now the hard work starts of figuring out what happened, why, and how do you make that happen again? So such thinking over a couple of years in lots of conversations with community experts led to the development of those mapping ourselves tools, as well as a much more extensive program for workshops, which in 2019, 2020 led to a major project, the We All Care initiative in Michigan. We held mapping ourselves workshops for several groups of people. There were high school students in a rural community in Western Michigan. There were restaurant workers and business executives, healthcare professionals and social workers. There were civic leaders, government staff in different communities across the state. And we had this variety because we wanted to explore who would find this stuff valuable. What impact could it have? How would that be different? And in terms of what we learned, the basic learning was that every group and nearly every single individual found the experience worthwhile. Initially, all the workshops were in person, but forced by COVID, we moved online. Participants basically learned the mapping ourselves tools, and at the individual family level, almost universally, participants felt much more aware of their situations and more capable of managing their lives. They often became aware of how many people contributed to their own well-being, and likewise, how many other lives they were impacting, that there was a lot more love and care in their lives than they had realized. They also expected to keep using the tools they've learned and felt comfortable teaching these tools to their family and friends. And in the process, they began to get comfortable with the idea of personal science. Again, the idea that it is possible for anyone to explore their own lives in a disciplined way. They learned that our tools, while useful, are just the start, that they were free to, and in fact, encouraged to, tailor the tools to their own needs and interests. As the head of one health organization noted, they were learning tools for life. And at the community level, they found that they had strengthened their bonds with each other and felt a deeper connection with and respect for their community. I want to stress that the experience of the workshops is as important as the content that is taught. there has been as much care put into designing the experience as into designing the tools. So I pointed you to the material on our website, and one can learn all the content by accessing that material. But we know a lot of the magic, especially around strengthening social capital, is in the experience. So this year, we've put a lot of effort into leveraging mapping ourselves to support the long COVID community. For those unaware, the term long COVID refers to the fact that many people who had a COVID experience and supposedly recovered continue to have symptoms long afterwards, sometimes debilitating symptoms. It's estimated that 10 to 30% of people infected by COVID go on to have long COVID. That's tens of millions of people. The medical community is at a loss to understand and treat long COVID. Over $1 billion has been allocated for research into long COVID, but it could be many years before that produces results. In the meantime, millions of people are suffering. So we decided to see if the Mapping Ourselves program would help such people. So working with leading patient organizations, the Body Politic COVID-19 Support Group and the Patient-Led Research Collaborative, we had 20 community leaders participate, and they found it tremendously beneficial, both in decreasing their isolation, strengthening their community bonds, and in helping each person discover changes that made a significant impact in their day-to-day lives. So now, together, all of these organizations, we are working with a major foundation to bring this to the larger long COVID community, and we call this effort Mapping Long COVID. So let me summarize what I've learned through these experiences, and these are really the three key ideas. The first is to open your eyes to become aware of all the care around you. Our society teaches us to give little value to the things we do for each other every day, to sharing a cup of tea with a friend, to smiling at the sales clerk, to picking up a friend's child at school because the parents are running late. Our society teaches us to only pay attention to care when someone is really sick, when a person is a patient, that the only care that matters is giving medications and doing whatever the doctors tell you to do. No, we need to see that actively caring for one another in our day-to-day lives is fundamental and very, very valuable. Caring for each other is fundamental to being human. Care is universal, ongoing, and communal. Second is that we need to build capacity to observe deeply. People's ability to observe their lives is so much better if they are taught appropriate skills and provided appropriate tools. We've started on that with our Mapping Ourselves tools and teaching personal science skills, but it's just a start. And third, we are social creatures who live deeply interconnected lives, and we should fully leverage this reality for our collective well-being. This means designing tools and experiences for communities, not just individuals. And it means sharing your experiences, knowledge, and skills and wisdom with each other. I'm not suggesting ignoring the advice of experts and scientists, being one myself, but rather encouraging you to discover value and take full advantage of real experience, real expertise within your own community. Let me close by noting that there are two common workshop series that we've been doing. One focused only on the Atlas Care Map is generally done across 2 Zoom sessions held a few days apart. The time in between is used to draw and reflect on your own maps. This is essentially the program that we did with those promotores in Santa Barbara. A 5-session program provides the basics of all 6 Mapping Ourselves tools. This is the program we used for the We All Care initiative in Michigan and the pilot program with the long COVID community, which now we're tailoring significantly for the long COVID community. But so I and the Weave staff are curious to know if you would be interested in such workshops, either for your own work with your own communities, or for us as members of the Weave community. Would we strengthen our connections and our ability to work together if we did this together? So let us know if you're interested. You can speak up during the Q&A, you can send me an email or reply to the little survey that you'll get at the end of the session. I'll end with another quote. This is from Nicholas Kristof, a longtime New York Times columnist who has just left the paper to run for governor of Oregon. And this quote is from his farewell essay. "The world's greatest untapped resource is the vast potential of people who are not fully nurtured or educated, a reminder of how much we stand to gain if we only make better investments in human capital." I believe we as a society have deeply undervalued and underinvested in what we people do to care for each other in day-to-day life. And I believe if we help people recognize, value, and improve their collective capacity to care for themselves, we'd be tapping into a vast resource. So with that, thanks for listening. We've got plenty of time for Q&A. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this and answer any questions you might have. So,
Raj, we have a question in the chat from
Yeah.
Jeff Furman. And Jeff, you can unmute yourself to ask, or we can read it, whichever you prefer. It's a great question.
I guess I'll just read it. Says, Raj, can you please describe any of the magic moments from the Michigan workshop experiences, moments when people realized the value of the experience? What was a moment when participants' light bulbs lit? So as an example of things that happened during the workshop, which is different because often the ahas happen afterwards when people reflect. But as I mentioned, one of the groups participating were those students, these high school kids in a rural part of Michigan. And, the thing was organized with some of their counselors, if you will. So they showed up kind of not knowing what this was going to be about and so forth, but they were willing to play along. And, halfway through the session, so, 45 minutes into it, after they started drawing their care maps and stuff, it was just fantastic to sort of see. I mean, you could almost see their faces start glowing as they discovered how many people were caring for them, how much love they experienced, and as they started to appreciate how critical they were to the community's well-being. As one of the girls talked about, she had only previously considered the fact that she babysat for her younger siblings, but now started to appreciate that, in fact, that was both, she loved doing it and how important it was to the family. Likewise, other the kids talked about what they did on various teams or in school functions and appreciating that that was actually something they were doing for the well-being of the community. This was eye-opening to them. They'd never thought about it in that way. A very different experience was how people who had been coworkers, like the example I told you about the waitress, kind of discovered during doing this thing that they were so much closer than they had kind of appreciated. And with one of the groups, it was both sad and good in that particular organization had a suicide in their community just a few days earlier. And so this was, particularly emotional as they went through this, but it also helped them tremendously to see how strong they were together. So there were all sorts of things. But again, a lot of the ahas happen in their own time as these things sort of, they think about them and they talk about it with their friends and family.
Rajiv, Lucy McKean asked a question it's related to what you were just sharing. And she asked, having just completed a suicide prevention training, I'm wondering if you have experience with people who find themselves feeling bereft of belonging.
Yeah, I mean, that's very real. Like in the first story I gave, sometimes you look deeply and it just makes you appreciate how hard things are. The very, very first workshop we did along these lines 5-6 years ago, we were not knowing what sort of response we had made sure to have sort of someone on standby who could point them to appropriate resources if they were particularly overcome. As it turned out, nobody has ever made use of that. So eventually we realized that people are on the whole much sturdier than we think. We have had a couple of times when people have come up to me especially when we're doing the live workshops afterwards, to both kind of thank me for the great session and very apologetically explain why they wouldn't be coming back, because they said their life was so difficult at the moment that facing up to it in this way was just not doable. So yes, there are times when people discover how harsh it is. On the whole, what people have said is that this is still proven useful, both for almost like reassuring them that they're not crazy, that things are really hard, which somehow reduces the mental burden of it. And sometimes it does give them ideas of what they might try. Like the first example where she realized that I'm not getting any help because I'm turning people away. So things have happened, but yes, some people's lives are difficult.
Thank you, Raj. Before reading Ellen Shepard's, I wanted to, what you were just discussing, I think answered Nora's question about, she asked during community workshops, would it be necessary or advised to have mental health professionals present, especially when it comes to events outside of workplaces and schools? And I think you did just touch on that.
Yeah, and in fact, I would add to it that we have learned, because we've also had lots of mental health professionals as participants, that their training has led them to, for appropriate reasons, be ultra cautious about these things. And so they, in their own work, they do so many things to, again, be most fearful of the people that are most at risk. In the process, the trade-off is that you don't empower and give sort of, adult active acknowledgement of the capability of the people that are there. And so they have actually enjoyed having the freedom to actually just be a person rather than someone with their boundaries on. So it's a challenging question, but we have found not having such professional sort of monitor has actually been helpful.
Thank you. So Ellen Shepard from Community Allies asked, can you talk more about how this work translates to communities? If everyone is drawing their personal care maps, how do you track overlap between them? I can understand how this works with families and others who are close, but not on a community level.
Yeah, it's a good question. And in a sense, one of the most underlying parts of this is the goal is not to draw a community map. In fact, even when you draw your own map, it won't be right. You look at it 3 weeks later and say, oh, I forgot this and that. So the idea isn't that you will necessarily have a community map. The idea is to help you start thinking much more richly about your community, and through the conversations, start seeing things much more deeply. Now, as a small example, we've had couples come to some of our workshops, and we don't tell them one way or the other. Some choose to sort of work together to draw their care map. Others choose to draw each one. Almost always they've gotten so much more out of it when they each draw their own. And then they compare and say, oh my gosh, I had never noticed that. We've seen that happen with, like sisters. They both come and they draw their own families and they're like, how did you see things differently? And so the conversation that results is really powerful. Now, having said all that, we are also working on tools that once people have become much more comfortable with these ideas, how can they draw diagrams that are kind of communal diagrams? For example, we're working with one group where after they've gone through this, we're having basically this work team kind of draw their joint diagram of who talks to whom in the team and who talks to the various people in other parts of the organization. And so now they're able to see how they as a team fit into the rest of the world. And that's very powerful too.
This next question from Jeffrey Hart kind of is connected to that, the changing of a map. Once the communities started to see the pathways of care, did they tend to grow larger to incorporate new people in their care, or shrink as they increase the intensity of care within the existing pathways?
Well, it's a great question that I have, on the whole, no answer to, because those are sort of long-term changes. And on the whole, we haven't been doing that. The exception, in a sense, is with the promotores, only because kind of the friendship between us and the promotores that formed through the experience have kept us talking to each other over many years. And we've just heard tons of stories from them about how they have sometimes strengthened their bonds, sometimes broken off bonds, was they've come to realize that one's not worth my time, but also how they just kind of whip out these tools and ideas in day-to-day life. There was one story about a woman who has children at an elementary school. She was at some function, saw some child who just looked really forlorn, and she didn't know him, but she's a mom. So she went up and started talking to him, discovered he was forlorn because both of his parents had been deported. Of course he's forlorn. And so he was all alone in the world, but she just felt that that couldn't be true. So she started drawing his care map with him and discovered, oh, where do you stay? You live at, oh, I live with my grandmother. Oh, do you have other family around, and so forth. And by the end of the conversation, the child realized that, yes, it's horrible that your parents have been deported, but you are not alone. And so in that sense, it's, I would say that on the whole, it's led to a much richer care in the community rather than a shrinking, but anecdotal.
And Lucy follows up with, she says, I wonder too, if there's a way for a community such as a school to help out individual people who feel undercared for. And I think that's very tied to the story you just shared.
Yeah, and we tend to view these tools as any tools as kind of identifying the gaps and what can we do about them, and they're very powerful that way, in at least making us aware of the gaps. Maybe we can do something about it. But I want people to come away appreciating that, in fact, what the most powerful things in most of our sessions is people discover how much there actually is going on that they had taken for granted, that they now want to celebrate and sort of support and keep going. And so as powerful as the fixing things part is, it's discovering how much is good has been particularly powerful.
Before I read another question, Raj, I wanted to say Ron Gross says, bravo, superlative, serviceable, and beautiful presentation. And Martin Lubell would like, at some point, would it be possible for you to take one picture of all of your books to the left of you? I love that comment. That's a great comment. And Michelle asks, have you ever had any participants map out the spiritual support that they receive, such as support that they may receive from their ancestors and from the spirit world? This would be a thick thread of weaving for me.
Oh, absolutely. So one of the key things, which I've sort of mentioned, but it sort of goes over people's head until they actually do it, is that we give sort of recommendations for how to draw the care map, but we encourage you to add your own stuff, like the cat in the cloud. And so like that, we've had many people add, one person first referred to it this way, and so I'll refer to it that way, as ghost people. In that particular example, it was Aunt somebody, and she explained that she had drawn it because there was no major family topic that got discussed without someone saying Aunt so-and-so would have said this, and her voice still carried clout. And so people have put that in. And likewise, I mean, at a more earthly level, people have included their churches or their pastors and so forth. It varies tremendously who puts what in. And we, in fact, encourage people to, if this sounds absurd, but don't dive too deep, in the sense of just do it, see what came out top of mind, and kind of pause and appreciate that before you start filling it out. Because honestly, you could spend a lifetime filling it out if you keep going. But yeah, the whole, the point that Michelle brings is a very important one for many people.
Excellent. So just some general questions that are coming in. I think people are eager to get started drawing their care maps, and and can they get started based on, I know we'll have materials in the hub and the recording, and will that be available, Raj? And also people are wondering, at your website, can they find out about costs, or how you bring your groups together?
Do the workshops together. Yeah. So on the two questions, when you go to our website, you'll see a tab for mapping ourselves, and within there's there's all the different tools, and there's, we think, really clear instructions on how to use all of them, how to draw them. Everything is downloadable and so forth. As I said, they're unfamiliar, so it takes a little bit to learn, but never mind, forge through it. It's pretty easy. In terms of the workshops so far, and all of the workshops we've done have been in collaboration with other organizations. And so they have almost always made them free for the participants. And we're a nonprofit ourselves, so we can't do everything for free all the time, otherwise nothing would happen. So many of these organizations, such as what Francis mentioned during the intro, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Michigan Health Endowment Fund, AARP, and others have paid us to run workshops for their communities, which is how we're able to do anything. But like with the long COVID community, we started off just like, look, something needs to be done. Let's collaborate and move it forward. Then we'll see, to expand it, what could we do? And so in the same way, this question of, should we as a Weave community do something together? We'll have to figure out how to make that happen. If it's 20, 25 people, we might just go ahead and do it, learn from the experience, and see how we could make it bigger. If it ends up being that, wow, this is a big thing that we need to do for tons of people, we'll have to figure out how to get foundation support to make that happen.
Thanks, Raj. That's great information. Ellen also asks, have you found that the work is effective across cultural, class, and racial boundaries? Are there ways you have adapted based on the audience?
Yeah, so it turns out to be sort of not a trivial answer. The trivial part of the answer is humans are humans, and these are just basic human things. And so far, we've had such a wide range of people, both in the US, but also, in Shanghai and Singapore and Australia and Sweden and Costa Rica. So people are people. These are very basic things. At the same time, where it makes a difference is if you're leading workshops, to the extent that you can share stories and examples that really resonate with the people, it makes a difference. Sometimes that's as trivial as using different names and place names in the examples. Sometimes it's deeper than that. So with the long COVID community, we had to go much beyond that, kind of acknowledging the physical challenges of these folks. Exhaustion at the extreme is a major issue. So we have to do lots of modifications for that. And the last part of the answer is what we're trying to do in working with communities is they learn how to do this themselves, and then they feel comfortable tailoring and changing things for their communities. So again, with the long COVID community, as we're going forward, we're working with a lot of geographic collaborators, and hopefully leaving them with enough sort of trained people in their community just to carry on the work.
Thank you, Raj. Before, I know that we're getting close to our hour, and I want to make sure that everyone does have a chance. We do have a very short survey about tonight's session. We've put the link in the chat, and if you'll just take a moment, if you click through to that link, it'll just take you to a form. And one of the questions in that short survey is about whether you would be interested in participating in a care mapping exercise. Yes, and if there are any other questions, one other link we will put in the chat is to join our community hub, the Weave Community Hub online, because it does have resources such as the resources that you are seeing tonight. And it is a place to connect with other Weavers across the country and even across the world.
So the other thing I'd like to ask is, I would just love to hear people's thoughts as to how this resonates with their own lives, with their own efforts at working on community. I've been happy to answer all these questions, but I'd just love to hear from you. Anybody want to speak up?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes, Fitzroy, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I just came across this a couple of days ago. I can't even think I think it was from the Aspen Institute that I heard about the work that you were doing. And I was really interested in it because I'm coordinating some community building work in the area where I live. And it is just really frustrating that so many people will talk about the lack of cohesiveness within the community, but it really not being able to get a handle on how to change that. So I was really intrigued by this. And so thank you, first of all, for the work that you do, for sharing all of this with us. And I'm really looking forward to being able to just start with a small group, the organization that I work for directly, and just trying to get everyone to hopefully participate in doing this care map. And then brainstorming on ways that we can use it with some of our clients. We're a sexual assault resource agency. And I was curious about, because someone asked the question, having a mental health professionals available when people are doing these care maps, because sometimes it can be very triggering. But I'm really looking forward to really developing this in our own community, because it is stellar. I really, really love this. So thank you.
Thanks, Fitzroy. I just add that one of the key things in these communities is for people to first use it themselves, like you and other leaders in your community, and then you're in a great position to decide how you might use it with, in a sense, your clients and so forth. So work with a lot of healthcare organizations and always with them as people rather than for their members. I think there's a question from Dennis.
Dennis has his hands up. Yeah. Oh, Dennis. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Rajiv. I was wondering, in your use of this tool and so on, has anyone ever looked at their care map and felt that their care must be as extensive, at least, of the earth from which we all come and to which we owe our lives, or maybe even further into the universe and the quantum world that gives continuous life to us all? I'm just curious whether anyone has perceived themselves in that kind of a context.
Yeah, Dennis, it's
Thank
very
you.
interesting. For example, just picking on the folks in Santa Barbara, there were many people that included the Santa Barbara beaches as a key part of their care ecosystem, and their favorite trails and so forth. And then at the larger level, one woman who is a person with dementia, but she's still very much functioning, she included the UN and all sorts of other organizations as part of her care ecosystem. Now, this was the most elaborate care map I have ever seen. Even with dementia, she's far smarter than me. But yeah, it does kind of get you to start thinking that way.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, I'll speak up. I'm Kathy Osler. I'm a pediatrician in Park City, Utah. And I put this in the chat, but I would love to hear your answer. So I'm thinking about using these tools in a couple of different ways. I have children in my practice who are struggling with mental and behavioral health issues in so many ways. And I think this would be very helpful in that regard. I'm also thinking about using this to deal with physician burnout, because caregivers have I think it would be very enlightening for caregivers to figure out who cares for them and who do they really care for. Have you used it in either of those regards?
Yeah, we've worked with lots of health organizations, ranging from a hospice organization to nurses and social workers to a major health system. And one of the challenges working with health organizations, they're so used to thinking that they need to think about their patients. And I have to go in, and it's like, why do I have to say the obvious? But hello, you're people too, and you need to take care of yourselves. And also that you will be in a better position to use these tools with your patients, with your community, if you actually first use them to understand yourselves. But But sadly, many folks in the health professions are kind of averse to self-reflection. So that's a big challenge. Also, you know, the thing that's shocking to many health professionals when they draw their own care maps is the non-existence of health professionals on their map. They realize in that sense how peripheral professionals are. And that's also kind of a wake up to them when they see them. I had early on this brilliant cancer surgeon who drew his map and was shocked to discover there were no surgeons on the thing. And in fact, that his sister and his wife dominated their care. But he was like pleased to discover this, and which was just really nice. But yeah, and you know, Kathy, if you want to follow on and talk more deeply about how you might be able to use it in your practice in that way, happy to do that.
Wonderful.
I'll
Thanks so
put
much.
my I guess I'll put my email in the chat so that everyone has it. I know it was on one of the slides, but you know, those go by.
Thank you, Raj. So it's 7 o'clock Eastern time, and we would love to thank Rajiv Mehta for such a wonderful session tonight. It was just outstanding. I've learned so much, Raj, and I'm so grateful that you offered to present this session for our community. And Maria and I have been putting into the chat, if you can just take a few minutes, please, to answer our survey and give us your feedback and stay connected with us that way. And also please join Weave's Community Hub online. Raj is a member there, and so you can stay connected to him, and we will include his work in our resources so that you will have access to this as well. Thank you so much to all of you for joining. We'll stay here so that you have time to grab the links if you still need to. So Maria and I will stay here for a few minutes, but thank you for sharing your evening with us. So good to see you all.